very much for joining us at the World University Summit for us here in India, day 2 of the summit. And welcome to this panel on transformative leadership in times of uncertainty. The world is finding its way out of a crisis, and so is higher education. What kind of leadership is needed for building back better? During the pandemic, we found ourselves in what for many were the uncharted waters of work from home. And as someone who's built a team from the office and also now built a team from home, I can say that the two can be quite different. What is transformation? Will what got us here get us there? And can transformation ever really come from the top? Here to reflect on these and other important questions are our distinguished panelists joining us today. And I'm going to, before we start the discussion, introduce them. Professor Barney Glover is Vice Chancellor and President of Western Sydney University in Australia. Welcome, Professor Barney. Professor David Lassner is President of University of Hawaii. Welcome, Professor Lassner. Thank you for joining. And Professor Adam Shoemaker is Vice Chancellor and President of Victoria University, also in Australia. Shortly to join us on the panel is Professor Uttam, who is President of the Star Scholars Network, joining us from the United States. I follow Professor Rajkumar in joining you all, and let me begin by asking you the first question. And if I may start with you, Professor Glover, on this. Complete the sentence. In my view, transformative leadership means ...
Thank you, Kalyani, for the introduction, and thank you to Professor Rajkumar for inviting us to participate. So I'll delay answering the question just to thank all of you for the opportunity. It's great to be able to join the summit today, and I do appreciate that we are no doubt connecting with people all over the world, particularly in India, but all over the world. And we're all moving through this very difficult period with COVID. So I recognise that, and I do wish everyone well, wherever they may be. I'm in Sydney, and we're going through another surge of the pandemic at the moment. So it's interesting to talk about transformative leadership in that context. And you mentioned in your introductory remarks, Kalyani, that you weren't sure that transformative leadership can come from the top. And it's interesting you phrased it in that way. I think that transformative leadership means, in my view, very clearly, enabling and empowering the people within our institutions and our universities to bring about strategic change in a time in which our sector, higher education, is under so much pressure in a variety of ways. So the empowerment and the enabling is critical in transformative leadership. And I know in our case, at Western Sydney University, going through 2020, we perhaps slightly counterintuitively, in a way, decided we needed to proceed with developing a new strategic plan in the midst of a pandemic, and to do it in a very different way with our colleagues within the university and our supporters and partners and stakeholders outside the university. And allowing colleagues within the university to reflect on the future as they saw it at what was a very challenging moment, and to develop from that a values-based strategic plan for the future. So the transformative leadership that I'm witnessing inside our university is about enabling and empowerment, and it's very much about framing the future for universities around the world. We're all going to be facing what is an extraordinary set of circumstances as we emerge from this phase of COVID into the long-term management of this disease in the future and coronavirus surges that will no doubt occur in the future. So we need to imagine higher education in a more disruptive environment. So transformation is a vital part of that, and empowering our colleagues, our students, because a lot of this will be about co-design of our future and not necessarily, as you put it, I think, Kalyani, driven just from the top, but in fact, a collaborative effort. But that transformation is going to be critical. It's going to be critical wherever we are in the world to ensure our universities are fit for purpose in what will be a very different set of circumstances that we'll need to operate in. That's very true in Australia, as Adam and I both know very, very well. So if I was completing the sentence, it would be about enabling and empowering our colleagues and about strategic intent and not hesitating, as might have been the case last year for us, to go forward with a new strategic planning plan and the development of that plan, but actually to seize the opportunity and to frame a future as we navigate through the pandemic.
So enabling and empowering with a strategic mindset. Love that. We'll write that down. Professor Lassner, same question to you.
I wouldn't disagree with anything that Barney shared. Maybe I'll just add a few aspects of this from my perspective. I think one of the things that a leader from the top has to do is create a sense of urgency. And that is not a natural behavior for many of our colleagues inside our institutions. And this has been a time where decisions, both short-term and long-term, have an urgency that we probably haven't seen before. A sense of urgency to make the decisions that needed to be made on a daily and weekly basis as we were learning how to cope with how higher education continues to function in a time of a pandemic. But also for us, and I think this is what Barney referred to, a sense of urgency that at the end of this pandemic, when it goes into its next phase, we have to already look different than we have historically. So this isn't a typical 1 or 2 year strategic planning process. We have to be making decisions now so that, from my perspective, we embrace the responsibilities that we have to support our communities in their transformations as well. Because it isn't just us who has been coming through this pandemic. Every community that we serve has a new set of challenges, and universities are the most important institutions for helping our communities face those. And again, it's not a role that everyone inside our universities has really had to embrace over careers that may have spanned decades.
So in a sense, the real transformation is probably understanding universities in a much broader context
and our roles and responsibilities to serve our communities.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. As they need to come out of this pandemic in different ways.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Professor Shoemaker, what about you?
Thank you, colleagues. It's an incredible time to be privileged to have these roles. And one of the things which I've been struck by is this absolute sense that democracy is rearing its head in new ways, and collegiality within institutions in new ways under pressure of crisis. And I'll give some examples of what I mean by this, in that, it's not just enjoining people to have a COVID test or to be vaccinated. It's making it happen in everyone's lives as much as possible, for all staff to be aware of each other's mental health, for all aware of students' issues as well. So I see this as one where we accelerated this pace of reinvention of collegiality in a new way, which is quite exciting in many ways, but also goes to the point of speed that David was speaking of. So like Barney, we also enjoyed just in the last 3 months a new strategic plan for our university, but we did so using a crowdsourcing platform and with nearly 1,000 people taking part daily over a 3-month period. Now, we would never have done that pre-COVID in that way. We might have thought about doing it, but we actually did it. And the result, I think, is better not just a compensation. It's actually improved. So I think turning it around and saying that you're enabled by the digital world, look at us now. Thank you again, Professor Kumar, for this. It's a very good example of what I call democratic collegialism worldwide in practice. That's what I see happening.
So transformation is taking lemons and making lemonades, is I guess what you're hinting at there.
We're very big on citrus of all types, shall we say. Yes.
If I wasn't oversimplifying there, thank you. Thank you so much. So my next question really would be, and because we're trying here to, shake you down as much as possible to extract your, vast experience and learning from that. What is the one leadership quality that you found yourself really leaning on during the pandemic? And you so far talked a lot about decision making, Professor Lassner. I'll add a little bit to this question. The question is, what is the one leadership quality that you found yourself most leaning on? And also, how do you strike the balance between making decisions from a crisis mindset to understanding when an issue needs to be dealt with from a long-term standpoint or with a long-term lens? And why don't I start on these questions with you, Professor Lassner?
For me, I think one of the most important qualities, maybe a couple of them. One is just listening with empathy. Passions are so strong. People are really nervous and concerned about their own health, the future of their profession and their work, what's going on in the communities around them and the people that they care about. And, as is obvious, they don't come to the same conclusion based on the same data. So to the extent a decision has to be made that doesn't satisfy everyone, I think it's really important that leaders listen, respect what they're hearing, and then ultimately, when it comes time to make a decision, to incorporate as much as possible into that, and to be empathetic again when announcing a decision and being respectful of all of those perspectives as well. I think you're right that there are decisions we have to make about what are we going to do tomorrow, and there are a lot of decisions we're making that are about what do we need to be in the decade ahead, knowing that our institution and our society is irrevocably changed as a result of this pandemic. And I think the opportunity to be thoughtful and much more inclusive about things when you can takes a little bit of the pain out of the reality that some decisions have to be made about something that's going to be done tomorrow. Maybe I'll stop there and leave something for my colleagues. It's always hard to be last, I know.
Professor Shoemaker, your thoughts on that?
Well, colleagues, I believe, and this is another good example today, deep listening rather than superficial listening has never been more important. The kind of concentration and focus on hearing others. And whether this is global politics, which we know is crucial, or indeed the movement of trade, or indeed the movement of vaccine diplomacy, as we've heard, deep listening could solve many of these issues. But in a university context, I believe it also means that you have to be prepared to be surprised by solutions you have not thought of before. I think David was adverting to this as well, that many Indigenous sustained people say to us, you've got to know your audience and you have to listen carefully, but also the journey is just as important as the destination. I think a lot of us with a kind of teleological view have said we have to know where we're aiming at 7 years from now, 10 years from now, but now that time frame's been foreshortened. So really, really being aware of that deep listening is crucial.
And if I may ask, how have you struck this balance between switching in and out of crisis mode and kind of understanding when we need to be reactive versus when we need to be proactive?
just to continue, in my own case, I've been very privileged to work in other universities, and in my prior university, which was called Southern Cross University in New South Wales, I don't think we were a stranger to crisis in any single year, because the environmental crisis of the world was very present. So we had not only floods, such as one is seeing in China at the moment, of that ilk. We had the ring of bushfires, which is, of course, you can see in many nations at the moment in the world. And of course, we had security issues. And then we thought we were just through that and just beginning to relax when COVID arrived. So in fact, every one of the 4 years that I was there, I think you could describe it as a crisis-laden year. And it's become, not that you become inured to it, but one is prepared always to be surprised by something which could arise unbidden. And I think that's the nature of what we're planning now. It's not just the known, but that which could happen, its potential. And of course, climate change renders that even more likely.
That's a Glover.
No,
Professor Glover, you may have gone back on mute accidentally.
I was hoping never to hear that again. That I'm muted. I feel terrible now. I was saying while muted that I support the comments that David and Adam have made. A couple of observations, though, from my perspective. And Adam is right. It has been a difficult period all over the world. And prior to COVID, in Australia, we were dealing with natural disasters, and some universities much closer than others. And I appreciate the great work that Adam was doing at his university last year when surrounded by bushfires. And we had flooding in ways that were quite challenging to many. So it hasn't been a time at which we weren't making decisions with a crisis either upon us or looming around us. So in a way, Vice-Chancellors managed those circumstances well. The pandemic, in a way, though, has given us an opportunity, to my mind, to illustrate how critically important leadership is in our institutions. And we sometimes, I think, undervalue it in the normal course of events. If there is such a thing as a normal year in higher education and the normal decision-making we go through and the consultation processes that are underway and engaging with our colleagues and our communities. But at the time of crisis, the leadership is palpable and the importance of it, and the way our colleagues look to the leadership of the university for guidance, for advice, for reassurance. And David's point about empathy, if you look for a skill that a Vice-Chancellor needs to bring to bear from a leadership perspective, David's right. It's very much about empathy, about listening, about understanding the circumstances that colleagues are facing at any particular moment. In our case, communication, as a big multi-campus university in Australia, communication was crucial, as I'm sure it is at every university, and we all go about it in a different way. But we found our outreach through all staff webinars that I'd lead was an incredibly important part of allowing people to ask questions unfettered of the leadership and to have us respond to those in real time, and to address some of the issues that people were worried about, not all of them professionally oriented, some of them about just the difficulties of working from home and looking after children and carer responsibilities and so on. So there are skills we bring to bear, and I don't think we should underestimate how important the role is. Decisiveness in decision-making is the other point. Our colleagues within our institutions, our students, want decisions at crucial moments, often in circumstances where a definitive answer is actually hard to give because we work in the greyness of the public health environment we might be operating in. But we need to give as much certainty around the direction the university is taking as we can. And your question, or the element, Kalyani, you were bringing into this around making decisions in the moment, the urgency of decision-making, because we have to move online, we have to get 1,500 courses online in 2 weeks, that we have to do professional development on using video conferencing technology, and that would normally take a decade, we need to do it in a week. Those sorts of immediate, urgent challenges actually bring with them, and I think we all thought about this, okay, we're doing this now, we're using technology in a way we hadn't imagined we would in the time frame we're needing to do it. Let's learn from this for the future. Let's future-proof our institutions, and draw that out from our colleagues about, as we came out of the first phase of lockdown in Western Sydney, we began to reflect on what did we take from this that we don't want to lose, and how will that shape our strategic direction as an institution. So I think it's a sign of the complexity of leadership in higher education, transformative leadership. You need to seize those opportunities, as well as dealing with the urgency of the moment and the near term. You need to keep an eye on how we're going to manage. We made early decisions to uplift our technology in a way that we hadn't imagined we'd do so rapidly, but that's now future-proofed us in a variety of ways. So Kalyani, I think there are elements here in the leadership function of universities where you can't take your eye off the future in the urgency of the moment. And I think our communities expect us of it, our colleagues, our students expect it of us. And I think right now, as we come into 21, looking to 22, we're much better positioned in some ways as a result of the pandemic than we would have been otherwise for a very disrupted future.
It sounds to me like your priorities as leaders and the things you give your time and attention to has also undergone such a precipitous shift and a change over these months and years. And I think what needs to be said is that empathy works both ways. I mean, we often talk about leaders being empathetic, but we all have to be empathetic in terms of the demands of leadership and the fact that there is only so much time and energy that and razzle dazzle that leaders have to spread around. And what's also fascinating is that we have around at the table today speakers from Hawaii and Australia, both places in which conversations around the environment and our relationship to nature. In Hawaii, certainly, there have been very long-standing conversations. In Australia, by the sounds of it, they're becoming increasingly important conversations. And it's in this context that I ask my next question. How do we encourage students to be global leaders while also serving their local context? I mean, if there's one other thing that the pandemic has taught us is that our own health, our individual well-being is so intimately connected to our local situation and our communities and the health of nature and our ecologies. So what have universities learned about this? What are they already doing, and what could they do better? Training students to have a global imagination, but to be very much dedicated to their local causes, and understanding that the global and local are in fact co-constituted. They mutually constitute each other. They're not at the exclusion of each other. So I'll start with maybe Professor Shoemaker on this one, and then go around.
Great. Thank you, colleagues. I've thought a lot about this because I think it's so crucial. The idea of students, and we're talking tens of thousands of students, each one with a kind of journey of confident capacity being created. And I think for us, and certainly in answer to your question, enabling that in a way we've not done before is top drawer. Absolutely. And I think different models of education are being invented more rapidly now because of not just the world crisis, but the sense of pressure of need. So I'll give you a concrete example. In the last 5 years, Victoria University has led, through my predecessor and colleagues, something called the block model, which is taking one subject for 4 weeks, intensively, done superbly well, and then finished, and then another in that suite. So in other words, it's not 4 subjects at once in a semester or a term, one after another. Now, that was a big radical call. It's the biggest experiment of its type in the Southern Hemisphere, if not the world. And happily now the graduates are starting to prove it's working. But that's only the beginning, because the student centricity of that is that student leadership of that model is crucial. So students on the university council, students as staff, students indeed, I have students as an intern all the time in my office, for example, advising on the latest aspects of these. So I'm sure that others do too, but I don't think there's ever been a time when the student voice has been more important. And also the sense of careers in the making rather than careers at the end of a degree. I think careers are being forged each step of the way. And I believe, for example, that having more industries on campuses will actually enable that, what we call a flipped campus model. So give you an example. If you're teaching law and you have a law firm on the campus and the partners in the law firm are eminent people who teach in as adjuncts into your school or faculty, and students meanwhile have internships, that's a wonderful way of inculcating that sense of leadership very early on, continuously at graduation and then beyond. So that's what I would say. It's that absolute focus.
Fantastic. Professor Glover.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and it's an interesting one to reflect on, as Adam's been outlining it from the VU perspective. Because I think we are all increasingly engaging with our students. I mentioned co-design earlier, and Adam's touched on it, to be involved with us in the curriculum reform journey that we are on, to ensure not just the modalities we teach in, not simply around the way we might micro-credential what we do and the stackable way we might develop our courses and programs to be more flexible in a variety of ways, but importantly to be guided in that by working with students and stakeholders. And I think what's really important when you talk about global leadership, and you made a really important comment, Kalyani, in your opening statement, and that is that we should never divorce the local from the global, and the importance of the local action having global significance wherever that might be. And I think in the context of the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, for example, and the work that we're involved in with Indian and Nepalese and Pakistani and other universities about addressing the fragility of that zone and the criticality of that to about 1.9 billion people who rely upon that extraordinary ecosystem for their livelihoods. And the world needs to pay attention to that. But the actions begin locally, and they can begin locally in Hawaii or in Western Sydney, as much as they can then have influence elsewhere in the world. Having students who believe and adopt the ideas of global citizenship are part of that. Now, for Western Sydney Uni, this is framed around our commitment to sustainability and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we're finding increasingly that our students are vitally interested in our commitment to the UN SDGs. The New Times Higher Ed ranking system, the impact rankings, has given more visibility to what universities around the world are doing to support the UN SDGs. As we come out of this phase of COVID, it's going to be even more important for each and every one of our students to reflect on the role they play to address those critical sustainable development goals, whether they relate to climate or to the environment or to poverty or to inequality in whatever form it takes, and the actions we can take at a local level that can have ramifications globally. So I think framing our new strategic plan around sustainability and our commitment to the SDGs and global citizenship is the way in which we are, I hope, engaging with and encouraging our students to be global leaders now and in the future.
Thank you so much. That sounds very exciting. Professor Glover, you said that so much of the action and initiative lies at the local level. So does so much of the wisdom and so many of the solutions, doesn't it, Professor Lassner?
Yeah, thank you. That was a great lead-in for me to build on Barney's comments as well. For us, we're a tourism-based economy, and tourism was essentially shut down. So Hawaii, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had the highest unemployment rate in the US. We had the most crushed public economy in the US. But at the same time that was going on, You know, it's a beautiful place, as I think everyone knows. Everyone here enjoyed the peacefulness of not having tourists on every beach, on every highway, on every hiking trail. And it really created a new value and understanding of the environment, because the change was so stark, going from a pace of, you know, we were at around 10 million tourists a year, literally to zero in a heartbeat. And that created a sense of concern about the environment and sustainability that I think wasn't as real as it was before. And for those of us, with apologies to my colleagues, with gray hair or not much hair, this is so much more real for our students, because when we talk about what conditions are going to be like at the end of this century, many of us won't be around, but they will be. And I think their sense of urgency is so important for us to support and empower them in ways that I think we didn't do so much. A part of it that's local, and I think is you know, certainly relevant in Hawaii, and I'm not familiar with the extent to which this is true in Australia, although I did read quite a bit that when the wildfires were coming along, the Indigenous people of Australia commented on how all of the wisdom of the original inhabitants of Australia about wildfires had been lost with colonization. And I think we see that here very, very intimately in Hawaii, where the local practices of the Indigenous Hawaiians were so much more in tune with the environment, and the appreciation of the intertwining of the lives of the land, the sea, and the people were appreciated, practiced in ways that we are trying to understand those and bring them forward into some of our practices. Obviously, we're not going to go back to the way things were for us really as recently as, gosh, 300 to 400 years ago. In Australia, much longer. But you know, those practices go back and developed in tune with the environment, and our students are really interested in understanding those and adapting those. And I will say the same for our young faculty who are Hawaiian. They are appreciating the wisdom of their ancestors and bringing that together with Western science in ways that I think are really inspiring for the future.
That's such a profound take on student centricity, Professor Lassner, because you just redefined it in a very generational sense, you know, which makes it so real. So thank you for that take. I'll just jump to the next question now, which is, you know, speaking of transformation, what are the levels of intervention that we're looking at? And given as we've just addressed the limited time and resources that leaders at the very top have at their disposal, I was wondering, what are some of your go-to strategies for inspiring colleagues to hone their leadership skills and make an impact throughout your institutions? Professor Glover, if I may start with you.
No, thanks, Kalyani. I think it's important to follow up on the comment, first of all, from David around Indigenous First Nations people. Thank you, David, for making that comment. And it was interesting to hear your reflection on things in Hawaii. This is something that Adam and I, obviously through our leadership of universities in Australia, feel deeply, the commitment to First Nations people here. And you made a very valid comment, David, that Indigenous knowledge around the management of fire going back millennia has been not completely lost, fortunately. We are finding ways to learn from Indigenous elders in Australia about those management techniques in the environment. It's true in the context of fire, it's true in the marine environment as well, right around Australia and in many, many other ways, desert knowledge and Indigenous medicines and in a whole variety of ways. And I believe in Australia we are doing a great deal at the sector level to engage with Indigenous people and to develop a sector-wide Indigenous strategy led by all of the Australian universities. So that I think is picking up on the very, very salient point that you made, David. So thank you for that comment. But I think there's more we can do globally in connecting Indigenous peoples together to reflect on the challenges facing the climate, the environment, our food supply, and those issues around the UN Sustainable Development Goals I mentioned. But to come to your question, Kalyani, which is really around developing leadership skills, this is a particularly important element to, first of all, in the context of going into the virtual mode that we operated in. And I know at Western Sydney University, we attempted to develop some new leadership skill development programs for our colleagues, recognising that in their environment at the moment, not being on campus, not being able to network in the same way, we needed to rethink the way we engaged with colleagues and developing their leadership skills. It's a little bit of a challenge to talk about leadership skills development as if it's a simple and straightforward concept, because it isn't. And demonstrating leadership and leadership by example is a crucial part of it. So we've been looking at ways to enhance our leadership skill development for the, if you like, the senior leadership group of the university, which is, perhaps 100, 150 people in the senior roles within the university, and then to begin to nurture leadership skills in those aspiring and emerging leaders within the university, how we can reach out to them. We wanted to frame this, importantly, leadership development in the context of our new strategic plan, because the way, and touching on the crowdsourced comment that Adam made earlier is a good example of it. You use new tools to connect at times of crisis, and we used various techniques to bring people together during COVID around our strategic plan, but to frame leadership around the values we embedded in our plan around boldness, integrity, fairness, and excellence. So those four simple values became the drivers of our strategic plan and the interplay between them. So when we talk about leadership with our colleagues, we craft it in the context of we want boldness, we want entrepreneurial decision-making inside the university in the context of a very disrupted environment that we are facing, but to do it in concert with the values of fairness, integrity, and obviously excellence. The way they play together, one without the other, is you would have to question the leadership context where you'd be attempting boldness, but you're not conscious of the importance of fairness, integrity, and excellence in that particular circumstance. So I think we're seeing new models of leadership development. And again, in one of those positive emerging elements from COVID, we are using technology more to bring people together, to have meaningful conversations. It doesn't by any means replace the important networking and leadership development that comes from being together. But importantly, it's giving us another way of doing it that's actually quite empowering for colleagues. And I think when we have sessions like this and we can use technology well, whether it's Zoom or WebEx or Teams or anything else, when we use it well, we can actually, I think, make great progress in developing our skills, in sharing what we've learned, in sharing our understanding, in sharing our problems and challenges as leaders. So I think that's all been emerging in a very positive way. And like I said earlier, these are difficult circumstances, but we can take a great deal out of it that will be very powerful in the future.
Thank you, Professor Glover. Professor Shoemaker, same question to you. And also, do you almost feel like the one-to-one dynamics in which leaders are involved have become even more vital, because that team environment which you draw support from has almost evaporated and disappeared for people. And so you almost have that one leadership figure to lean on and almost to kind of rely on more. Is that your experience, or have you found some ways to maintain that team support system?
Well, thank you for the question, Kalyani. I'd like to think that we can reframe that challenge, the individual challenge that you put, and put it this way: instead of focusing on the boundaries, the borderlines, focused on the bridges. Because, for example, how does one senior leader solve the problems of someone else rather than just their own? How, if you had a student who had our jobs for a day, how would they do them differently? You know, those kind of experiments really are powerful. So just joining up a few of the thoughts earlier, if in the past we all in public purpose, taxpayer endowed or private universities would talk about working with partners. In fact, we do every day, but partnering with principle and with ethos is a different thing. So that's sort of where it's been pushed now into a different frame, which I think the world is seeing is much more effective, because that's where trust is maintained. Or in the past, we would talk about, you know, as David did very effectively, the environment in Hawaii, how, you know, gorgeous it is and under threat, many are. But this concept, which isn't just the UN SDGs, but that's very strong, but also we flip it and say, Indigenous people in Australia call that protecting country. And when they say country, they mean air, land, sea, water, and story. So what I'm getting at here is the leadership isn't always what is taught. The leadership is we get taught as well. It's a two-way street. And that's what I think is so exciting about the new ventures that we've got. Doesn't mean people don't hold roles. But to summarize, again, if you're very student focused and people are given opportunities to rise to challenges, they can design with you a new building, can design with you a new lab, design with you a new campus in a way which we haven't done before. We want to make that opportunity happen. And we also want to make it happen for First Peoples, as was said by David and Barney very effectively.
Wonderful. Professor Lassner, how do we create leaders throughout institutions rather than just followers?
So we have, and it's hard to answer in other than the context of this, you know, the COVID crisis that I think occupies most of our time, most days, in some way, either directly or indirectly. We created a leadership program here, and we actually call it the President's Emerging Leadership Program. And the goal is to identify emerging leaders. They're nominated from throughout our university. We have 10 campuses and research and education facilities spread on 6 islands. So we want to grow leaders everywhere throughout the institution. Everything from a financial officer to a faculty member to an assistant volleyball coach. We need them everywhere. And we don't know where they'll emerge from. So we've created that opportunity. One of my big disappointments, I'd say, is that in the frenzy of coping with the pandemic, it's one of the things that we put on hiatus during the pandemic, just because we couldn't do everything and we didn't manage to reconceive it for the totally virtual environment as we did with all of our classes, our business meetings, our processes, our communication, our shared governance, all of that went virtual. But I'm reflecting as I listened to Barney and Adam, what a missed opportunity that was for those emerging leaders. If you can almost think about if every day or every week they had the chance to ask about what we had encountered, how we dealt with it, and why, that would have been amazing. And I know they'll still have that opportunity moving into the next year. It's not like I will have forgotten what we have faced ever, but certainly that's an opportunity to share what happened in the crisis. But 2 things we did that I think really were effective. One was almost the first day when we were faced with crisis decisions, and I'm guessing Barney and Adam did something similar. we had daily teleconference. It started with a small group to make decisions, and almost every day somebody would say, gee, we really should have in the dean of students who wasn't there, or a facilities manager, or someone, and that grew to be a fairly large group. But we modeled how we make decisions together with people who wouldn't normally have been in the small executive suite decision-making processes. And I think all of those people benefited throughout that. We also had a number of very targeted task forces. So we had a vaccination group, and we had people from public health, nursing, medicine, who would not be considered institutional leaders, but who were our best and brightest on the specific topics. And they were together with people from our staff senate, our student government, our faculty senate, and I joined the vaccination group. So I could ask the kinds of questions that those people wouldn't normally hear a president asking a professor of medicine or nursing or public health. And so I think we had a lot more shared, and as was already said, this was me learning from them leading in their profession. At the same time, others could have the opportunity to lead on specific topics, and others could participate and learn from those interchanges. So, some things we did well, and I'm a little disappointed that we lost our kind of flagship structured leadership program for next gen institutional leaders, but we'll get it back.
You slightly preempted another question that I was going to ask you, which I was saving for the very end, but I will ask it anyway if we have time. Thank you all. I'm now going to move on to the audience questions, and there are many, so thank you to the audience for the very engaged involvement here. I'll ask the one which we haven't touched on yet, which is on employability and the future of work. How has online learning affected the performance of students in terms of employability? What are the thoughts of leadership? And how does the changing future of work figure into your own sense of direction and your own vision for your leadership moving forward? And we'll start with Professor Shoemaker there, please.
Oh, thank you, Kalyani. It's a terrific question. It's a global question. It's absolutely as crucial in India with its incredible variety of employment structures and peoples as anywhere in the world. So put very simply, I believe that never before in recent human history, at least, have more occupations been invented quickly that were not foreseen. The kind of border operations, the kind of, who would have thought 2 years ago, the most in-demand occupation probably in the world would be contact tracing and vaccinology, this kind of thing. Who saw that coming, right? So the fact is, we got very good, I think, at redisposing our ideas for people who are graduates into new fields. But now it's time to also bowl those back into the programs. So as I alluded to before, one of the advantages, I suppose, of Victoria University is that it has what could be described as vocational education and higher education under one umbrella. So if you wanted to be someone who was a patient transport officer for emergency transport, that's one occupation. Paramedicine is another. In most universities, they'd be split. In ours, it's joined. So I guess what I'm saying is, as we go forward, we are going to see new forms of bridging of occupations like that happen, much more than ever before. For example, nursing and paramedicine, I think, is a logical one in the world that we're facing post-COVID. So I would imagine the workforce developments that we can contribute to are unique, empowered, and have never before in human history been so rapid. Very exciting indeed.
Great. Professor Lassner. Yes, Professor Glover, I was going to ask you one more thing, in addition to how you were just about to respond to this question. My sense is that probably in Australia, there has been already a kind of a background in students learning and working at the same time, or a kind of idea about lifelong learning, or a kind of idea about an acceptability around changing careers. And inherent to all of that, a certain kind of dignity of labor as an important principle in society. And I reflect on many of these things, painfully aware that we're still kind of working towards achieving many of them in India, even though we have our own strengths, of course. So what do you think are some of the societal mechanisms that are already there, and some of which are lacking in this whole kind of debate around future of work?
You've expanded the question to a really interesting topic, Kalyani, around the societal dimensions. And I do think, and Adam's touched on it, we're dealing with such a dynamic situation, certainly in Australia, and I'm assuming it's very similar in Hawaii and around the world, where we're seeing emerging job opportunities in industry sectors and new skill requirements that are reshaping higher education and actually reshaping the nature of higher education, how we deliver those skills that are needed for the workforce of the future. So in Australia, to come to one of your earlier comments, and I think society, at any time of industrial disruption, society goes through a period itself of unrest in trying to equilibrate with those changes, the disruption that the labour market experiences, and then it has to equilibrate and grow again. And you can pick that over the last 200 years as we've seen industrial revolutions. This is no different in that regard. It's going to disrupt some jobs and create new jobs, and we've got to be able to respond to that. To go to your core question, though, it's been interesting during lockdown about how we've pivoted away from the challenge of work-integrated learning not being available. And that's really the concept we like to build around in Australia. So it's connecting work experience with credit-bearing assessment within the university, so that students can be in the workforce, getting the skills and experiences they need and contributing to their educational endeavour. The challenge has been that's not been available, and we've had to pivot to online and virtual modes of doing work experience and work-integrated learning. And that's actually worked surprisingly well in many instances. In the health dimension, of course, clinical work is still critical, and those clinical placements and managing them have continued to be a vital part of it. But we've opened up a new, and I know in the case of the Australian government, for example, it's driving an agenda around STEM plus skilled graduates, work-integrated learning, and industry placements being now at the core of what's expected of universities and the way we deliver our programs. So we've got a national imperative to intensify that and to do it with a virtual dimension to it during the pandemic.
Professor Lassner, what's your take on this?
If you had asked about the future of work for me before the pandemic, it would have been all about the impact of artificial intelligence, automation, robotics, and how do we help the people whose jobs are going to be lost to those technologies. And it's a double-edged sword for higher education. I think we're developing the very technologies that are changing the nature of employment, and we also have the responsibility to help those who are most impacted to find them other kinds of employment opportunities. I think what the pandemic put on top of this is the realization of just how many jobs can be done effectively at a distance, and that changes everything. How we do those jobs, things that are done better electronically, things where we're just accommodating opportunities for people not to have to commute long distances to get to offices, opportunities for universities and business to downsize office spaces because we don't need as many workers on our campuses, potentially classrooms because we're doing more distance learning and our faculty are teaching from home. So I think a big chunk of this is it's all about agility. Agility for us to be able to adapt. And, like many of my colleagues, we were the primary source of training contact tracers That's so long ago, I forgot about it already. But we stood up a program and trained a couple hundred contract officers for our state Department of Health when they needed it, because we had the expertise and skills, and we're able to do it. But I think above all, while we're training people for jobs, we also have to remember that we're educating people for their futures. And that encompasses what employers tell us all the time is we can train people to do the tasks. What you have to do in your university is you have to educate them with the basic skills that they're going to need for any job. And the data suggests that many of our graduates will have 6 or 7 careers, not just jobs, during their lifetimes. And almost all of those jobs require communication skills, persuasion skills, teamwork skills, creativity, problem solving, entrepreneurship. And different employers will give different lists, but those are the things that I think higher education, as we commit to preparing our students for employment, we also have to commit to preparing them for long-term employment in a variety of careers.
That sounds great. Final question, and a quick one because we have just 3 minutes remaining. But I have to address how depleted you're probably feeling doing all of this. So I'm tempted to ask you, what are you doing what is your practice to build back better, to rejuvenate yourself, to sustain yourself? And of course, I'm looking for ideas to steal here. So why don't we start with Professor Lassner on this one?
I am finally managing to take bits of time off, and that is really rejuvenating. I encourage everyone to do it. And then once a week, I try to play tennis and go swimming in the ocean.
Sounds lovely. Professor Glover.
One of the great things about lockdown is time working, when both my partner and I are in the house together, working together. She's in one room, I'm in the other, and our Italian water dog, our Lagotto, is running between us, and catching up for a few minutes during the day. That's an extraordinarily positive way of reinvigorating yourself that we don't have in the normal course of the life of a president of a university.
Sounds fantastic, and I know what you mean. I too have a pet that's kept me going and kept me hanging in there. Professor Shoemaker.
Look, I cannot disagree with the companion animal theory. It's absolutely been doubled for us, and also it's an attempt to. In so doing, it means you get into a schedule, which is every day. You can schedule real time, real places, and it's not just fitness or purpose, it's invented new purpose. So in my case, it's either outdoors or if permitted, but I do a lot of swimming when that's permitted as well. Not in the ocean, sadly, David, but certainly in pools. So, but I think you have to schedule. You really have to plan it, because if you just leave it to happenstance, the only person planning then is the dog. And we must be a little bit more in control of the environment than that.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. By the way, I recommend yoga and meditation. That works too. Thank you so much. This has been most enlightening. I've had so much fun talking to you all and learning from you all. I hope our audience, who have been very interactive, have enjoyed and gained as much as we have, I'm sure, out of this discussion. And look forward to many more such conversations, and hopefully in a not too distant future, conversations in person as well.